Hey, it's Angie from Block 81, and it has absolutely been a minute, but in this video today, I'm actually going to go over how I structure my files for Craft CMS in 2025. Let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so here I am inside of VS Code, which is my preferred code editor, and I just wanted to quickly go over the kind of high-level directory and file structure of my particular project. Now, this project is what I call my Block 81 Craft Starter. It's basically a starter project or a boilerplate project that I start all of my brand new Craft CMS projects from. When I inherit a site, obviously I stick with whatever the previous developer has set up, but this is for brand new sites. All right, so starting with the legacy folder, this folder really is just files that I tend to keep when I'm refactoring code. I kind of get a little paranoid about losing things and not being able to bring them back, even though I do use Git. So what I'll often do, for instance, is just create a duplicate of the file, put it in the legacy folder, and then the file that I'm actually working on, I can just go crazy on and even completely rewrite it entirely if I need to. The next folder is the .ddev folder, which is what I use for my local development, ddev. It's just a wrapper around Docker. If you're familiar with ddev, you need no further explanation. If you're not, I really suggest you look into it if you're doing local development, particularly for PHP-based web development. The next folder is the .vs code, which just contains settings for this particular workspace or this particular project. The next folder is the config folder, which is part of Craft CMS. I really don't use this folder a whole lot. Obviously, it contains the license key, but it can also contain other PHP files depending on plugins that you might be using. So a good example would be the Imager-X plugin. After that, we have the migrations folder, which I actually have never used, which is part of Craft CMS. But if you're doing content migrations, then this is the folder that you'll probably access. The folder after that is the modules folder, which again is also part of Craft CMS and is often used when you're creating something that's akin to a plugin for a specific project. So you'll have your PHP files in there for your custom plugin. It's basically a plugin, but it's called a module because it's specific to that project. A plugin really is something that you're going to distribute and have other people use in their own projects. So then we have the public folder. This folder is obviously the web root. This is where all of the images and different files that get used and whatnot for the front end of the site go. In my case, it's usually called public or web, just depending on the server setup. Sometimes it'll be public _ HTML or something similar to that. After that, we have the source folder. This is where the unminified JavaScript and CSS files go. And then we have the templates folder, which we'll get into in a little bit. That is where all the twig templates for the Craft setup go. Then we have our .env file, which is all the settings for Craft. I have a .env.example file in here that does get checked into the repo. The actual .env file does not get checked into the repo, and that's just because, it's not necessary, and you want to keep that information out of the repo because it will contain database information, among other things. Then we have git ignore, the bootstrap.php file, also part of Craft, Composer, which is required for Craft for installing and uninstalling plugins and doing updates and that sort of thing. Then you've got the Craft file, which is also, as you can tell, part of the Craft setup. Then you've got the package files for npm, the package lock and the package.json. Those are pretty straightforward. I do use PostCSS these days. It's a little bit redundant because I also use Laravel Mix, which you can see down here at the bottom. I'm not sure why I still have this example file for Webpack, for Laravel Mix in here, but it's really kind of redundant. But I do use Laravel Mix to compile the CSS and the JavaScript, into smaller files and everything. To put everything together. So PostCSS is a little bit redundant in that sense because it can do that depending on the plugins that you have in there. But primarily what I use PostCSS for is for cleanup of how the code is written, the CSS code is written, and as well as for specific browser prefixes, like when you're doing like auto prefix or that sort of thing. That's what PostCSS is for. All right, with that out of the way, sorry that took a little while, but with that out of the way, let's head into the templates folder. So this is obviously kind of the heart of the files and everything for your Craft CMS project. And the way that I do this is a little bit different than what some developers will do. So the first folder that you'll see in here is the underscore layouts folder, and this is basically the main template. So I have main.twig, and it contains the doc type, the HTML, the head, and the body. And then it pulls everything in depending on what part of the site you're on. So you can see that I've got this RSS feed commented out because not every website that I have that I've worked on is going to have a blog or anything that requires an RSS feed. But I have it in there so I remember what the format looks like. But you can see that I've got navigation in here and the site footer, as well as the JavaScript to the main JavaScript file and the CSS file already set up and ready to go. So this is pretty much done. I don't have to do this work every time I create a new site. So then we have partials. Now, I used to call this folder underscore includes. I switched it over to partials because with Craft 5, the main text editor, which is called CK Editor, allows you to have different blocks inside of it, not just the actual text and whatnot. And the way that Craft does that by default with the different files is that it uses this partials folder. So instead of kind of fighting against it, I've decided to lean into it. It's not my favorite term, but partials works great. So that's what I've gone with. And what I have in here is the partials that I will typically use on most projects. So we've got accordion, a breadcrumb, button, card, drop down, etc. The favicon I have in there, of course, because if I use a different layout for, let's say, a landing page instead of the main layout, which you saw just a bit ago, then that having that favicon in here as a partial is really handy. So I don't need to copy that over, and just, to keep things dry. So I also have a few different partials for images. So this first one is Imager. So if you are familiar with Imager X, which is a plugin for optimizing your image sizes, then this is what I used to use for that. I really don't use Imager X much anymore. So I don't know why I still have it in here, but there it is. Then I have Image Standard and Image Large. So Image Standard is really for images that, are just your standard images that go within the flow of the document that aren't very large and that sort of thing. And so this partial just takes a look at the image, checks to see if it's an SVG. If it is, then it has a different format. If it's not, then we're going to set it up as a picture element with different sources. And then with Image Large, we have the same kind of thing, except we're focusing on images that are very large. So for this, what I'm looking at is images that are going to span 50% of the viewport width or the whole viewport width. So anywhere from 50 to 100% of the viewport, these images are going to be processed with the Image Large partial. Other than that, we have our, a text block, a video block, and some other things that are pretty standard just to keep things simpler and ready to go for when I'm ready to start a new project. Now, not everything is styled in here. In fact, I'd say nothing is styled in here. Like if we take a look at the text block, I know that I'm going to use a prose class here, but that's about it. If I need to modify it, then, I have to do that as the project goes on. Not every project is going to have a blog or a news section or something similar, but I do have that set up because it is pretty common these days. So I have the blog entry file in here, and so it's going to look for the different block types, because almost every blog setup that I have uses what's called a content builder. That's what I call it. That's what a lot of people in the craft community call it. And what it is basically a matrix field that uses different block types. It could be any sort of combination of block types, to be honest. And so what the smart thing to do here is, so that you're not repeating yourself again, is to just include a partial for that block type. So for instance, if we have a text block, then we're going to include that just by this include statement here, and then it's going to look for that text block if it is called text block. Okay, so then after that, I actually have an RSS feed template. And the reason I have this, even though I don't use it a whole lot, I do believe that blogs should always have an RSS feed. Even though I don't have a lot of use for it, I do keep it in here because I can never remember how this is supposed to be formatted. So having it in here just makes it nice and easy. All right, then I have site pages. So I do things a little bit different with my crafts sites. So some people will use singles a lot, which is a type of section inside of Craft if you're not familiar with it. but I use what's called a structure section. And I use that for the home page and any other page that's relatively static in a way. Static isn't the right term for it. But the reason I do that is because it gives site editors, site managers, the ability to see how the hierarchy is in their site, but also to be able to add new pages and move them around and that sort of thing. So I have site pages, and that includes the home page. So what we're looking at here is where we have a simple include that's looking at the specific entry type for the site pages section. So the different entry types will vary. So I have a home page entry type, which right now obviously doesn't have much because home pages wildly differ. And then we have a standard page, which almost always is going to have a content builder. Again, the same thing as I talked about with the blog, that's going to be made up of different matrix blocks. And so that keeps things real simple. So then it's just a matter of adding the different HTML to actually, lay out the page itself. Okay, so then after that, we just have a couple more pages. So I have a 404 page, which is obviously when a page isn't found. I don't always use a custom 404 page. I would love to do that more often, but often I'm just running up against deadlines and clients really don't care that much sometimes. So I will either just use this and just style it real quickly, make it real simple, or I'll just delete this file and let Craft take over the 404 because it does have 404 pages by default. Same with the 503, which is used typically when the site is offline. So I will sometimes include this in there, but usually I'll just delete this file. But I have it in here just for reference in case I do decide to use it. Now this last file is called the kitchen sink file, which I just use for seeing how my styles are being applied on different elements like a table or just even your paragraph, an article, that sort of thing. I don't always use it, but it's in here in case I do want to use it specifically for larger sites that have, like a bigger design library, that sort of thing. So that wraps up how I structure my my templates inside of Craft CMS, as well as the rest of the organization in a project. If you have any questions, definitely leave a comment below, and I will see you in the next one.